Okay, welcome everybody to Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. This is a presentation that obviously has touched the hearts of many people regarding the very few viewings of butterflies. I think that most of us have seen this whole summer. So Steve Perkins of the Tryon Institute came to me and said, Tryon Farm Institute came to me and said, what about putting together a special program? So that's what he and I have done for you this evening. I always forget to mention who our hosts and sponsors are. So I want to do that before I forget. This would not happen without the sponsorship of Save the Dunes, Michigan City Sustainability Commission, plus the support of 219 Green Connect. And Kathy Sipple is here with us. 219 Green Connect provides us with all of our platform for our MailChimp and our Facebook and all of those other good things. Our guest hosts this month are 95.1 FM AM 1420 WIMS. They are in Northwest Indiana and Southeast Michigan. Tryon Farm Institute, the Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum, and I hope I said that right. And if I didn't, Doug will probably correct it when he presents. Natural Habitat Evanston, National Wildlife Federation, and Susan Kirt Photography. So I want to thank all of our sponsors and hosts, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. What's going to happen is we have a timeline for this evening, and basically we're going to do the welcome. I'm going to hand off housekeeping to Dylan very soon. And then we have a major presentation by Doug Taron, and that's going to be followed up by a panel of 3 individuals. We will hold questions and answers until the end. But while we're doing this, you can always drop your questions in the chat, or for you that are listening Facebook Live, you can drop them in the comment section. And then we'll have announcements, things green that may be coming up that you know about, and then we'll close the evening. Tonight, it's probably going to go over an hour, so I just want to warn people, because we have a major presentation and then a panel of 3 people. So instead of our usual hour, I would plan probably an hour, 15 minutes, an hour and a half. And it's totally understandable if you're not able to stay with us the whole time, but I hope you're able to do that. So with that, I'm going to hand this off to Dylan. Dylan, thank you so much for being here with us. Dylan is one of the new staff people at Save the Dunes, and she's very brave to do this solo this evening. And from the bottom of my heart, just thank you for taking this on and being our techie for the evening. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your patience as I figure all of this out. So just some housekeeping items for you all. This will be recorded, and the recording will live on our Facebook page and YouTube. We're live on Facebook now, so if you want to see us on Facebook, you just go to our page at Save the Dunes, and you can see the recording from there. We encourage you to share the recording with your network. Everyone will be muted for sound quality. We find that the best sound comes when nobody but the presenters are talking, so everyone will be muted. And in the meantime, you can drop your questions in the chat or in the comments on Facebook, and we'll answer them at the end. And maybe even everybody will be unmuted at the end, we'll see. So that's about it for me.
Thank you. I am also going to forego doing lengthy introductions or biographies of our speakers. If you're interested in learning more about them, you can certainly go on the website to their various institutions, and you can learn more about them. Our first speaker is Doug Taron or Taron. I'm not sure. I'm really bad with pronunciation of words. So Doug will set us straight if I got his name incorrect, and also if I got the name of his institution incorrect. He's the curator of biology and Vice President of Research and Conservation at Chicago Academy of Sciences, Peggy, Notebaert Nature Museum. Plus, he's also the director of the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring. So Doug, without further ado, if you want to go into screen share and unmute yourself, then we're ready.
Okay, give me just a moment to get into screen share here, please. Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. I am Doug Taron. I am from the Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum in Chicago, and I am going to talk to you this evening a little bit about the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, what that is, some of the data that we've been collecting, and some of what we have learned from the data that we have been collecting. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both some of the analyses that we have done on butterflies in general, and a little bit about analysis specifically around the monarch. So the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network has been around for some time. It was founded in 1987. It was originally a program of the Nature Conservancy. At that time, the Conservancy was doing a lot of ecological restoration work in on natural areas in the Chicago region. And most of what we think about when we think about typical ecological restoration activities are things like brush cutting and clearing invasive plants, collecting and scattering seeds, prescribed burning, and all of these things have as their primary focus the plants on the nature reserves. And the Conservancy was wondering what the effect of these activities was on animals. And they asked Ron Panzer, who at the time was at Northeastern Illinois University and did a lot of work with them, if he could devise something where they might be able to use volunteers to collect data about some sort of insects on the prairie, because insects are the most species diverse group on the prairie. And Ron was aware of a program that had started in England that became the basis of what is now the UK Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. And he thought that that would be a good model to use for creating such a program to model butterflies in what would later become the Chicago Wilderness region. And this program is currently supported by the Chicago Academy of Sciences, and it is entirely volunteer-based. And so our protocol is something called the Polar Transect. And this was created in England by a man named Ernie Pollard in the mid-1970s. Pollard wanted to be able to detect long-term population trends in butterflies. He wanted a technique that was quantitative, and he wanted a technique where lots of people could be deployed to collect the data so that potentially one could, over time, amass a very large data set. And that, in fact, did happen in the UK. It's been emulated in many places, and it has now also resulted, as we will see in a moment, a very large data set here in Illinois and Northwest Indiana. The protocol is a designated walking route that is designed to traverse all of the major habitats and management units of a site. And each volunteer goes and walks this route at a constant pace multiple times over the summer. And while they're walking, they record all of the butterflies that they see within 20 feet of themselves. And our program here in Illinois requests 6 surveys to be conducted each summer between late May and right about now, the end of the first week in August. And here is an example of a census route. This is the census route that I've been walking since the late 1980s at Bluff Spring Fen. And you can see it starts here near the parking lot. And while I'm monitoring, I just wind my way around over this route. The different colors on this line segment correspond to different habitat types that I traverse while I am walking. And I am collecting data within 20 feet of myself while walking through this whole route. We now have well over 100 people everywhere from the Wisconsin border down to south of Carbondale, and from Lake Michigan all the way over to basically the banks of the Mississippi River, collecting data. So as I say, the program was a response to prairie restoration, and our emphasis is on butterflies in natural areas. And since we started the program, we've also, for reasons that have to do with our publicly funded database, restrict monitoring in this program to public lands. We do include lands that are held by land trusts within our definition of public lands. So we're looking at what the effect of restoration is, particularly on animals, particularly on butterflies. What we have found actually over time is that in practice, we have learned a lot less about the details of management practices and a lot more about things like climate change and how it affects our butterflies. Butterflies are an ideal study subject for a variety of reasons. First of all, they're diurnal, so you can go out during the day and collect data. And in fact, it's even a bit more civilized than bird watching, where people are up at the crack of dawn and out on their field sites at 4 in the morning to collect bird data. We don't really, the butterflies don't really get going until about 10 in the morning. So this is a real advantage for creating a program around them. They are easy to identify relative to some other species groups. So, just a moment. I'm timing myself so I don't go over. They don't need a lot of specialized equipment in order to study them. And about a third of the species in this part of the country show a fairly high fidelity to remnant natural ecosystems. So this makes them a particularly good group if you are trying to see how you are doing in preserving biota on some of our nature preserves. These numbers I need to update. Since 1987, we actually now have over 17,000 transects surveyed. And there is some chance that by the end of all of the data submission in the 2022 field season, we will actually be over 18,000 surveys recorded. We have now recorded 117 species. The new species, since I made this slide, are mostly from the far south of Illinois, where we have monitoring going on far enough away from here that the species composition is significantly different from what it is up here. We have over 20,000 hours of field time now, and by sometime next year, we are going to record our 750,000th butterfly. And this shows the growth of the program up until about 2018. The growth has continued. We are now getting data from over 150 sites a year, and we are now fairly routinely pulling in over 1,000 butterfly surveys each year. So as I mentioned, part of Ernie Pollard's motivation in setting up this particular kind of protocol is that it raised the potential for collecting a very large data set. And in fact, in the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, we have thus far been very successful in doing that. In fact, when we are approached by researchers to get access to the data for, say, a grad student project or something like that, one of the comments we frequently get is, oh, wow, this is a bigger data set than I was anticipating. And some people like that. Some people find that kind of challenging to figure out how to use a data set of that size. This is an example of IBM monitoring sites that are active in the Chicago metro area. This just gives you an idea of how dispersed around the area they are. The greatest concentration of sites is in the Chicago metro area, and that has to do with simply the fact that that's where the population base for amassing volunteers is. If you zoom out and look at all of Illinois, what you'll see is most of the sites are concentrated up in the Chicago metropolitan area. There's very little in the middle of the state, and we're going to be trying to address that over the next few years. And then you get down by Carbondale in that area, and there's been a very robust activity down there in about the last 5 years. So there's another big cluster of survey sites down there. This is our data form. It's a simple protocol with easy requirements. This is what makes it possible to function well as a citizen science program. We have two annual group training sessions. One is in late February when we do an online all network meeting. The other is a field experience in July. We also do recruitment and beginner trainings virtually throughout the spring. One of the things that contributed to our success is our early adoption of electronic data storage, which seems sort of silly to say now, but back in 1989, when I took over as the director of the program, it was considered very avant-garde that we were going to be storing our data on the computer rather than just on printed data sheets in a filing cabinet. And keeping up with technology has been one of the challenges of this program. We now have a online database that is used by various monitoring networks around the country that use the Pollard survey protocol. We have a website, and we have this national database, Pollard base, allowing common data entry from all of these programs. And there are about a dozen states or regions in the country that now have monitoring networks that use this program. Most of these programs have been modeled after the Illinois program. So the interest initially was trying to correlate long-term trends to management practices. And there's been a lot of interest, for example, in the role of fire. And what we have discovered over time is that this is actually very difficult because this is a very noisy data set. Butterflies naturally show a lot of year-to-year variation in the population size. Some of this noise can be viewed at the individual species level. Some of the noise can be viewed with butterflies in general. And as was alluded to in the introduction to tonight's meeting, this has not been a good year for butterflies. Some of our findings have not related to the original program plan, and that in particular has to do with climate change. We've noticed a number of species where we were originally at the southern edge of their range are no longer recorded in Illinois. Several of these you can still find, but you now have to go to Wisconsin to find them. We have some data suggesting that more southern species are becoming more inventive into the region. And we have data that have shown elimination of at least one very rare species, the Carner blue from Northwest Indiana, in sort of a very abrupt and catastrophic manner back in 2012. So one of the things that you can ask is this program seeing what's actually out there? So if you look at about the first 20 years of data from the monitoring network, you can compare the number of sites that have recorded data and the number of species that have been recorded. And what you see is back in the late 80s and early 90s, we were still very small. And we were seeing on the average of between 40 and 60 species a year. As our numbers started growing, so did our species detection. And so by the time we got to 25 to 35 sites recording data per year, we had pretty much saturated out, and adding more sites shows you more butterflies, but you don't necessarily get more species detection from this. Now, this does not include another bump up in species detection that we saw when we brought Southern Illinois into the network in a bigger way. So this is pretty good evidence that we are seeing what's out there. We'll see some more evidence in a little bit that suggests that what the monitors are detecting really does reflect things that are happening in the field. This is a paper that came out in 2012, and it shows with a little bit more statistical rigor the same thing, plotting both in Chicago, basically Cook County and the Collier counties was the slice of the data set that was used for this analysis, and with a different protocol in New York City. And what you see is similar to what we were reporting. As you get around 40 people out there monitoring, you really start flattening the curve out. You don't see more species by adding more people. New York City uses a different and more opportunistic protocol, and by using a less quantitatively rigorous protocol, they do accumulate species more rapidly with increasing volunteers than the Illinois program does. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we have used our data to do some analysis on monarch populations. And this is a graph that many people have seen. This is a very alarming graph. And I wanted to share this graph because one of the messages that I'd like to give tonight is that the situation with the monarch, although of concern, is not as dire as some of what we hear, particularly in the media, might lead you to believe. So this is the graph that is often shown. And you'll notice that it starts in 1996 and ends in 2014. And I keep waiting for people who are using this graph to extend the data beyond 2014, because it's now 8 years later. Well, we've had 7 years of data after this. And why does it end in 2014? Well, the thing is, this looks really, really dramatic here. But if you zoom out and look at the data both earlier and later than 2014, you'll see that it is not the same. And in fact, the data continues. It's now in the last few years been up in this range here. And you also notice that the year that they start speaking of is an abnormally high year. And this spike in population in 1996 has been seen. What you're seeing here is the data that were collected in Mexico. You see that in the data that was collected by the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network. You see that with data that was collected in Ohio, and in the Northeast of the United States. So these are completely independent programs that all show this huge and largely unexplained population explosion in 2016. This is a bad example of cherry picking data to show that a particular narrative. And the actual data, while they do show a statistically significant decline on the monarch population, it is not as dire as what many people show. And in fact, I have seen the graph in a current media piece on the monarch going from 1996 to 2014 as recently as something that came out 2 weeks ago. So people are still using only this particular part of the data, even though it's not an appropriate thing to do. So this is the data from the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network. And what you can see here is 1996 again, that big outlying year. 2012 12 and 13 are bad both in Illinois and in Mexico. And this corresponds with an enormous drought that happened in 2012 over much of the upper Midwest. And that's reflected in very, very low numbers that then have rebounded somewhat since then. If you plot these two data sets together, just by eyeballing, without doing any statistics at all, you can see it looks like they're kind of rising and falling in concert with each other. And in fact, if you do a statistical analysis on this, you will see that they are in fact highly correlated with each other. And that in fact is really important because it's additional evidence that what we are seeing with the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network, at least with the Monarch, is reflecting things that are actually going on in the field. You would not expect such a tight correlation in two sets of data that were completely independent of each other and did not have some sort of causal link with each other. So in 2015, I co-authored a paper with Leslie Reese and Eduardo Rendon Salinas called The Disconnect Between Summer and Winter Monarch Trends for the Eastern Migratory Population, possible links to differing drivers. And this was published in the Annals of the Entomological Society. And at that time, most of the monarch population analysis had used the data that's gathered every winter in Mexico by the World Wildlife Fund on the wintering grounds. And the analysis in our paper compared the World Wildlife Fund data in Mexico with data that was gathered in the summer by the Illinois Butterfly Monitoring Network in Illinois and across the northeastern United States, kind of centered in New York, but expanding beyond that by the North American Butterfly Association. And so this was a comparative study between these two data sets and the winter roosting sites. And what did we find? Well, we found that the Illinois and the NABA data strongly correlated with each other. That's also really important, is confirmation that what both of these groups are detecting reflects what's really going on in the field, because these two programs function completely independently of each other and use different data collection protocols. In particular, the Illinois data strongly correlated with what would be seen in Mexico the following winter each year, but did not correlate with, but the Mexican data do not correlate with what's going to be seen in Illinois the following summer. So what that suggests is that something that happens in the spring and summer on the breeding grounds is more important for setting the annual population size of the monarch than is survival on the wintering grounds in Mexico. Significantly, our data set does not show significant decline in the summer populations as measured by either the New York or the Illinois data set. So this is the disconnect between what we're seeing on the breeding grounds and what we're seeing in Mexico. We still do not have a full understanding of why there might be a disconnect, and there have been a number of studies that have come out since then. Studies that include the breeding grounds in the US and Canada tend to confirm that the decline is not significant, unlike the Mexican study. A very recent study has suggested a couple of other drivers that may be in play, and we'll talk about those in just a bit. Now, I want to make sure that I contextualize this, because this is not kind of a universally accepted conclusion. In fact, there was a rebuttal printed in the as an editorial letter in the journal that this paper was published in. Conclusions of no decline in the summer monarch population are not supported. At that time, There were 3 major objections raised to the study. As it turns out, these 3 objections are all really different variations on the same concern. The first, they were saying that egg counts are more effective than adult butterfly counts. Now, egg counts are much more labor intensive, and you do not generate nearly the volume of data with egg counts that you get with adult counts, but there is a citizen science program that does count eggs and larvae. The thing that makes that attractive is the milkweed limitation hypothesis has been considered to be a big driver of decrease in the monarchs, and egg counts can be done right in agricultural fields. Pollard surveys do not work terribly well in agricultural fields, and in fact, you're not really welcome to walk on a wandering survey through a cornfield, quite understandably, and do butterfly counts. Agricultural habitats were not surveyed. Well, this is really just basically a restating of the concern about why egg counts are superior. And IBMN surveys focused on the vicinity of Chicago. That's, I think, not a particularly valid concern because a lot of the survey sites, you saw the map with the pins all over the Chicago area, and they extend beyond that. Many of our survey sites are immediately adjacent to agricultural fields. So, to hear that criticism makes it sound like all of our surveys are being done between O'Hare Airport and the Loop, and that's just not the case. And here is, as a reminder, our survey sites are quite scattered, and particularly as you get around the periphery here, there is a lot of agriculture still going on in that area, even in the face of significant suburbanization. There was a rebuttal printed to the rebuttal. And in fact, this was printed before my co-authors and I could even craft our own response to the editorial. And this is Lee Dyer and Matthew Forrester. And again, neither of these rebuttals are actual studies, but they are critiques occurring within the scientific literature of our study. And they say these are all good criticisms and should be taken as relevant caveats to any conclusions from the feature summary. The feature summary is our paper. And we agree with that. However, to adequately reject a null hypothesis of no decline in summer populations, simple verbal models such as those presented in the critique are not sufficient. About a year after our study, there was another study that came out linking continental monarch migratory cycle of the monarch butterfly to understand its population decline. This study actually also found no significant decline in the northern populations. And it did not use IBMN data, but it did use the NABA data set. So where does this leave us now? Very recently, a brand new study was published, and its authors included Leslie Reese, who was the lead author on the paper that I was the co-author on, and Karen Oberhauser, who is a major monarch scholar who was one of the authors on the rebuttal to our study that appeared in Annals of the Entomological Society. And what they discovered, they went in detail to the milkweed limitation hypothesis. The milkweed limitation hypothesis basically states that the advent of Roundup Ready corn, which is genetically modified corn, has resulted in farmers planting this herbicide-resistant corn in their fields, treating them early in the growing season with Roundup to kill all of the weeds. And this gives the corn a competitive advantage that it did not previously have and increases yield. And so they looked at that in detail and actually were able to procure quite a bit of data of use of Roundup Ready corn and Roundup across the upper Midwest. What they discovered is that that technology was very, very rapidly adopted, such that by about 2007, just about all of the agricultural fields that were growing corn and soybean in this part of the country were using this technology. And so its use had plateaued. It wasn't going down, and we weren't getting back any of the milkweed resources in these fields, but loss of milkweed for this reason had flattened out. They then did a very, very elegant statistical model that looked at Roundup Ready corn. They looked at what we had seen about reproductive success in the North being much more significant for setting the annual population size than overwintering success in the wintering grounds. They looked at nectar resource availability along the southern migration, and they looked at climate. And what they found is that the milkweed limitation hypothesis may have been in play early on in the adaptation of Roundup Ready corn as a technology, but doesn't really seem to be being in play so much now. What the real driver is at the moment seems to be climate change. And in particular, warmer and to a lesser degree, drier environmental conditions in the southern part of the Monarch's breeding range. And by the southern part of its breeding range, I mean basically from the Rio Grande Valley up to, say, southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. And warmer and to a lesser degree, drier conditions in that part of the country are associated with lower monarch population numbers. And this seems to carry through much of the reproductive part of the, so the whole summer basically. And that seems to be very important in setting the population size for the year. Now, this paper has not been out very long, so there has not been a lot of time yet for any sort of response or criticism of this paper. It will be very interesting to see how this continues to develop.
Doug, thank you so very much. And we're going to hold questions until the very end. Okay, so if people have something specific that they would like to ask Doug, then we'll do that a little bit later. At this time, I would like to hand off the program to Sean Tomlins. And Sean is from he actually is the president of the Tryon Farm Institute. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about Tryon Farms and also some of the pollinator field planting they've been doing at that particular site. Sean, are you ready to share your screen?
Sure am. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Nancy. I am the president of Tryon Farm Institute. We're a small but mighty nonprofit in Michigan City, Indiana. We're a 100% volunteer organization, and basically we have a 120-acre nature preserve that we basically try to connect the community to. So we have several outreach events during the year. We have school classrooms doing their some field work and just field trips at Tryon Farm. And one thing we try to do with the acreage we have is really maximize the native plants that we have on the property. Tryon Farm is a pretty cool place. It was an active farm back into the early days of Michigan City. The history goes back into the 1830s when the original owners of Tryon showed up. They helped build the 1892 barn that's on the site that we now have in the historic Register of Historic Places. But anyway, we're talking today about pollinators and prairie, and I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to kind of fly through this. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. If Nancy's going to share contact information later. And if you want to be involved at all with Tryon Farm Institute, our website is tfinstitute.org, and you can sign up for our newsletter. So anyway, but what I wanted to talk about today is basically that we have, this is an overhead map of the property. And like I said, it was an old farm. You can see the existing farm field in the bottom right-hand corner that is still actively farmed by a local farmer that uses it for hay for some cattle. The top left corner was another farm field that was also actively being farmed for hay. But as I joined the organization and, you know, started learning more about habitat loss, I thought this would be a really cool spot to plant a pollinator friendly field. So we worked with the DNR, and we obtained an EQIP grant to plant that field, which was fully paid for by that grant. And it was a pretty cool process. And a lot of those involved at Tryon, you know, we're all volunteers and we're all learning as we go. So that last presentation was fascinating to hear about some of the science. We would love to do some of those things at the farm as far as collecting that kind of data. So rather than sending Steve out on his walks to look every once in a while and not find them, it'd be cool to do something more consistent. So anyway, the top left corner, we got a grant to plant that. Basically, like I said, we'd work with the NRCS conservationists. We also reached out to Stephen Packard, who's worked a lot in the Chicago area with Cook County Forest Preserves, just to make sure we were kind of doing what we thought was the right thing. And we also worked with Shirley Hines. So really, once you get involved with these things, it's wonderful that there's so many people out there that are interested and love this kind of work. So this little pocket is like a 6-acre field. So we got the grant, we hired a consultant, Blue Stem Acres out of Rensselaer, and he helped us with the project. So what did we do? This deck was kind of my pitch to the community, trying to explain to them kind of what we wanted to do and why. A lot of you on this call, you know why we're doing this. Prairies have benefits, huge benefits that we've basically annihilated. You know, there's 2 to 3% of this habitat remaining. So even though we're a small organization, any part we could do, you know, we thought would be important. And so that's why we undertook this. I'll save the poem for later. If you want that, you can email me. The details of the process, it started back in 19 when we applied for the grant. We basically had to kill the field. I know we looked at many ways to do that. In the end, we used herbicide. The recommendation was to do dormant seeding. That's kind of a trend in plantings, and that going through the freeze-thaw cycle, it helps, you know, create a better success rate. Anyway, the weather was so wonky this year that our farmer couldn't get out there and actually do it. So we ended up with a spring planting. And so we'll see how it goes, right? So I told everybody through this process, the first year it's going to look like garbage. At Tryon, we have the nature preserve is built around a housing community. So there's a lot of interest in, you know, what it's going to look like. And as I've tried to level set, it's not going to look good for a while. So year one, there's going to be a lot of weeds in there. A lot of the flowers won't show up until at least year 2 and 23. Hopefully in 24, we can get back together again and I can show you some really cool pictures of what's going on. But this will just be a really fun monitoring process for our organization to see what works. And then this is our planting day. So there was our tractor and our seed. This was the picture I used to help people understand how the progression potentially will work. I stole this from somebody. It was in my footnotes later. The plants we planted were the NRCS conservationists basically have a seed list that you have to sort of stick to. We supplemented probably about 15 different forbs just because I wanted to. I thought it would be interesting. So we have sort of your traditional native grasses, except for big blue stem, because we didn't want that to take over the small 5-acre field. You know, these are sort of a lot of your traditional favorite pollinator plants, but so these are all in our mix. And then most importantly for this conversation, we've got, you know, the 6 different types of milkweed that are native to the area. So we'll be monitoring that to see how it takes. I do have some pictures. So this is the field post hay production and post preparing the field. So it was very dead. That said, there was a lot of natives that were there that actually are growing now that we didn't plant. So that's sort of fascinating to me. This is where we are today. So I took some pictures this weekend. Obviously all the grasses are doing great. If you really zoom in, you can see quite a bit of flowers that I really didn't anticipate seeing right away. So a lot of a lot of black-eyed Susans, Indian blanket, the milkweed, whether that's what we planted or what survived, I'm not sure. And then obviously there's a lot of ragweed, Carolina horse nettle, pokeweed that kind of survived through this whole process. So that's where we are today. Like I said, I look forward to sharing you the results. One other thing we do, just talk about collaboration. We partnered with the Indiana Wildlife Federation, and they have helped us with some pretty neat signage that we've put around the perimeter of the front of the property, talking about the importance of prairies, the importance of burns, just trying to educate really the community and everybody that stumbles upon our nature preserve. Anybody on this call, I would just, I'd say, come on out. We have a map at the front of the property, take a picture of it. We have a very well marked 5K trail that you can walk. And, you know, if you want, go ahead and be a member, and then you'll get a few emails from me a year. I'm gonna, last thing, I'll fly through this. So we're trying to maximize all the pollen, you know, all the native plants in the property. We had a little demonstration garden that was created by a school class over 10 years ago. And so that's the first part on the left, obviously early spring, fall. And then we expanded it because our volunteers love to work and dig sod. And I know everybody's got opinions on the best way to do that. You know, put down cardboard is another way. Well, we just dug it up for this pollinator. And on the right, you can see it's actually doing tremendously well, even after just 1 year. And then we're just going to keep going. So like this year, we did another little section on the right. You can see the plants are doing pretty well again. And then, yeah, we're just going to keep going. So there's a little plot across the street, and that's going to be the next part we do. So that's it. I appreciate you listening to me. I know I talked fast, but I know there's a lot of speakers, so I wanted to be cognizant of that. But feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Thank you so very much, Sean. And our next presenter is Leslie Shad, I'm guessing. I hope I'm right. And Leslie is the lead of Natural Habitat Evanston. And she's going to share with us what they did in her community to actually get some Federation Community Wildlife Habitat certification in Evanston, Illinois. So Leslie, if you want to share your slides, that would be great. You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Right, I have to stop share to be able to do this, sorry. Okay. Thank you so much. So I lead Natural Habitat Evanston. It's an all volunteer community group in Evanston, Illinois. I also, and my husband and I are restoring 21 acres of forested woodlands across the street from from Tryon Farm. And it's the former Clark's Secret Garden, if people know that. So working on that and private thing. So very committed to Michigan City and Northwest Indiana. Anyway, so as Natural Habitat in Evanston, we're aiming to change the culture of lawns. And we started in 2014, and it seemed like a way to, this is all volunteer, so as a way to sort of get our sea legs on community engagement, we decided upon the National Wildlife Federation Community Wildlife Habitat certification program. There are other programs out there, but I'm not going to go into why we selected that. But I do talk with groups about, how we went through the process of selecting this National Wildlife Federation program. It basically consists of certifications that are required. I think you might be able to see my cursor. So you have to certify homes, schools, and community areas for food. Put your head in the mind of a caterpillar. Food, water, a place to raise young, which can be milkweed, shelter, and sustainable, sort of a cafeteria of sustainable options like composting or whatever. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is community outreach and education. So it forces you to do partnerships, to set up publications, to do kiosks and other things like that, which was enormously useful in terms of figuring out your assets and obstacles in the community. It was very, very helpful, but it is kind of a basic, it's a self-certification. Most people are going to be able to certify their gardens if they're at all interested in sustainability. So we moved from that to doing a Pollinator Pledge, which is a way for us to group together sort of the 2.1 level of sustainability in pollinator habitat. So it sort of groups together our curriculum, which is leave the leaves and plant stalks, no pesticides, native plants, mow less, and reduce light pollution. So that, as a result of that, we talk about, leave the leaves. These are the critters who are damaged by not leaving the leaves. We talk about host plants, that so many insects, not just butterflies, rely on host plants. And then we both make garden visits and talk about transitioning your garden from, for example, here's Pachysandra, but it can also be turf, to what this garden now looks like. This is early summer and this is late summer. So there's that. And this is my front yard, and I did the cardboard lasagna, and I talked to people about how to do this. We planted it with buffalo grass and Pennsylvania sedge, depending upon sun or shade. Now it's evolved to we have about 800 people reading our newsletter monthly. We give away plants and trees in the underserved community, probably 45 of them last year. We restore native areas and parks, where you give away host plants for the rusty patch bumblebee, a federally endangered bumblebee. We also sell host plants, but the giveaway is in the underserved community. We speak a lot, and then I'm really happy we have a bird-friendly building ordinance that suddenly has popped up and is going to City Council on Monday. So that would be great. And we have a private tree ordinance that is in committee, and we need to kick it out of committee. So we're strategizing that. These are some of our materials, on lighting, artificial lighting. We have garden landscaping. Leaf blowers is a big concern, but to me, it's a distraction. I mean, we need to be leaving the leaves and in any case, not blowing with electric or with fossil fuels. These are funds we set up, and a rusty patch bumblebee, and we did a no mow May. So that's the end of that. I just wanted to give you a taste of what we're working on, and I'm happy to help people. If you're interested, I would love something to get going in Michigan City.
Leslie, thank you so very much. And you nailed it. You did it in 5 minutes. Thank you. So our next presenter is Susan Kirt. And Susan is a biologist, and she also serves on the Save the Dunes board. And she's going to be talking with us about a homeowner's guide to pollinator garden landscaping in Indiana's coastal communities. And Susan worked on this project, and I know she'll tell you how to get it after she's talked to you about it. Susan? You need,
All right, just wanted to unmute myself first, since I just learned that. Okay, I want to share. All right. Okay, so I'm not trying to share that, don't worry. I did want to share, if you guys can see a PowerPoint presentation here. I hope. But you can't see it?
We're seeing your Safari, I think. The Zoom.
Oh. Can you see it now?
No. Oh, there you go.
Okay, it should say backyard butterflies. So that's just a screenshot from, or not screenshot, that's a picture from my yard a couple years ago in the background. But I wanted to start off with a little video I took on Monday. Okay, I have a few different organisms that I found in my front yard right over by my, at the end of my driveway. And I'll show you what that looks like before getting into the guide. And so here you can see most of these are down by the road. This is the only non-native I have, but I will be switching that out for a native block soon. But still getting lots of different butterflies and everything else in my yard. Sorry, tossing food into the mouth of a hungry child. And just wanted to show you some of the species that you can find. And these were just some pictures taken with my phone. And when I look at my yard, this is a picture from about this time last year. I am expanding that. And again, it's mostly native plants. But when you look at this, I do have a bunch of milkweeds. I have several different species of milkweeds. They're usually covered in monarch caterpillars, including this year. And I just want to point out that they really do like to go to other locations to make their chrysalis. And unfortunately for me, they really like the weedy goldenrod right here. It's Canada goldenrod. But when I went out Monday, I did see a monarch caterpillar and a goldenrod. And I think most people are aware they don't eat goldenrods. And so I knew that this one was going to form a chrysalis. And so this morning, I stopped on my way out of my driveway, and sure enough, where you see that monarch caterpillar, you will see a chrysalis. And I just want to point out, as I go through talking about how to plant your yard and native plants and resources for that, that you don't want to just plant milkweeds for monarchs. They do need other plants, even at that younger stage, that caterpillar stage. And then I wanted to not only talk about the Save the Dunes pollinator guide, but I did want to point out that if you go to the Field Museum and you type in Field Museum Rapid or Field Guides, they do have a number of online field guides to help you out identifying lots of different organisms. And I just typed in Chicago region, and you can see that you can learn a bunch of different things, including you can scroll down. There's tons and tons and tons of different material on all sorts of different subjects, including one that we finished up this year, which is select insects in your Midwestern native garden. And they also have another one that came out a couple years ago on butterflies of the Chicago region. But I'm really here to talk about the Save the Dunes guide. And I've helped out with this quite a bit. And in one of our participants, Victoria, was one of the impetus behind this. So we can thank her. And this again is online. I typed in Save the Dunes Pollinator Guide, and I'll find my way to this particular downloadable free guide. And the Field Museum guides are free also. And so when I go down, I can see an introduction. And I'll also see our region, our 3-county region. And you see all these different colors. And as I continue going through the guide, which you can also get in a book form from Save the Dunes at their headquarters in Michigan City, you can see though that the colors correspond to different habitats that you will find in those areas. That includes prairie, the dunes down by the lakefront, dune and swale, which is a rare habitat that we have here in Northwest Indiana, as well as different types of woodlands and wetlands. And this is to help you use this guide and help you where you live determine what species are going to be really good to plant in your yard. So as we go through this, we'll see it's mostly about native pollinators, although we did put one outtake on the European honeybee. The honeybee is non-native, folks. And thank you for whoever put up the direct link to the guide in the chat window. But the European honey guide is non-native, even though most of us probably really enjoy honey. There has been some studies that it may be somewhat hurting some of our native bee populations. And there's a lot of study happening on that right now. This guide is more concerned with planting native plants and attracting the native insects to those plants. And some of our native insects, like a lot of our mining bees, they only visit one or two species in a particular genus. So they only are flying and out as adults for a very tiny window, maybe a couple of weeks. And if you don't have the plants, you don't get these bees because they will not make it in your area. But we do have a large number of bees. And I want to point out that a lot of people are afraid of bees and wasps. Most bees and wasps will leave you alone. They don't care about you. It's only a few of the social bees and wasps that you have to be worried about. The honeybees, if you disturb them, like step on them or whack at their hive, they may try to sting you. And some of those wasps that like to make nests on our house, like the paper wasp, they can be a bit aggressive. They're protecting their homes. Who can blame them? So that's what they're doing. They're not out to get you. They're protecting their homes.
Hey, Susan, really quick. Yes. Your slides aren't changing. We're still seeing the same ones.
Oh, no. Thank you for telling me that. Because it should. See, I've been going through this guide. Can you see it now? Save the Dunes Pollinator Guide?
Yes, we see it now.
Oh boy. Sorry about that. You guys have just been staring at a screen in my yard. But just to go over real quick, we do have the Field Museum guide that I was mentioning, how they have tons of guides on the Field Museum site. And I pointed out the butterfly guide for common butterflies, and then one that we just put out this year on select insects in your Midwestern native garden, some of which are the exact same pictures in the Save the Dunes Pollinator Guide. So there's a tiny bit of overlap. All right. So we're back at my screen here. We should be seeing the Save the Dunes Pollinator Guide.
Yep.
And what I was talking about earlier with the different habitats, you can see that here with all the different colors and how they correspond with the different habitat pictures. All right, sorry. So as we go through these native insects, these are the mining bees I was talking about a second ago. And we have different sections. We have different butterflies that you might see in your yard. We'll have different moths that you'll see in your yard. And moths are excellent pollinators, folks, for the most part. They are very furry and fuzzy looking, and that's going to collect pollen. We do have one other animal that a lot of people are familiar with, the ruby-throated hummingbird, that will also pollinate different flowers, especially those that are red. Though they will pollinate other colors. We have your beetles, and we have flies and wasps. And we do have a lot of mimics. So a lot of flies will mimic other insects, especially bees and wasps because they want to scare off potential predators. And Barb Labus, who's an excellent illustrator that lives in our area, she did the insert in the middle of our guide that shows what your yard could look like in 4 different seasons. And so she did an excellent job, and she talks also about where they live, including in the winter. And when you look at where they live in the winter, you can see a lot of caterpillars and other organisms are actually living in that leaf litter that we'll find in our yards. And when we look at that litter, if we mulch it up or we bag it up to be taken to the compost site, we're actually going to be killing a lot of those organisms. You also have a lot of organisms that live underground, like a lot of bumblebees, as well as your fireflies do live underground as young. Okay, and so there is a, I do like to point that out to kind of discourage trying to take care of grubs in your yard with herbicides and pesticides, because you are going to be killing off potentially a lot of organisms you actually like. There's also some templates to give you some ideas of how to design your yard. Okay, so you can see a couple of these as I scroll down. If you have a woodland area or a prairie area and you can see the colors that match up at the top again, you can see some of those different areas. So wherever you live in our region, you can find corresponding guides on what you may want to plant in your yard. So this goes for any sized yard, including, it can even be a patio pot. And then the last part of the guide will go through and talk about a lot of the different flowers that you may, and plants that you may want to put into your garden in order for you to attract those native insects. Okay, so you can see how this last part, as we go down, they'll talk about the blazing stars and obedient plants and all of our coneflowers and things that we like to see in the yards and that the butterflies and other insects like. Okay. So as I go through and finish that up, I just want to say thank you for dealing with a lot of issues. And here is the little guy that you keep hearing. So we'll put him down, and I'm going to turn off my screen real quick. And please, someone else take over.
Susan, thank you so very much. And before we move on to questions and answers, I do want to point out that Leslie Shad has offered to assist people if you're interested in becoming involved in transitioning yards to native flowers and grasses and whatever. And Kathy Sipple also made the offer. So I want to be sure that I made that announcement before we move into questions and answers, because I know sometimes it can seem pretty overwhelming when you're looking at a whole yard of turf grass and you're trying to figure out what to do with it. So we have 2 experienced people here today who are willing to help. Dylan, if you'll come back with us, please. We'll first take questions and answers off of, I don't know, you want to do Zoom first and then Facebook, or, you do it however you want, okay? But let's be sure we get those questions people have posted first.
Yeah, I want to start with your question for Doug, actually. Nancy, you asked, in view of the data presented, what does it mean that monarchs have been placed on the International Union for Conservation of Nature recently? So Doug, do you have an answer for that one?
The listing by the ICUN that happened recently was done on the basis of the data from the wintering grounds in Mexico. And that data set is showing a statistically significant decline that matches with the IUCN's guidelines for red listing species. It is still being looked at very closely, but not fully understood why the data up here in the breeding grounds are not showing the significant declines that the data on the wintering grounds are.
Thank you for that. And speaking of data, we have a comment from Victoria. She wants to know if you have information or data that is representative of the current status of monarchs or other butterflies. If you have any recent data from US FWS.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They are going to be revisiting listing by under the Endangered Species Act in 2024.
Okay. Okay. So I think now is a good time to allow you all to unmute yourselves for any questions. I think it would be best if we maybe raised hands so that everyone isn't all at once, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have.
And downstairs under the reaction button is where you can push the hand, and then Dylan or I can call on you, okay? There's a raise hand
Okay.
icon there. Anybody? Don't be afraid, and you can still type them in on the Zoom chat too if you want to do that. Stephen,
Yep.
can we call on you?
Sure. I'd like Leslie to talk a little bit about the community process that resulted in the certification. I know you worked at it for a long time. You worked with institutions, with individual homes. Do you think it's replicable in Michigan City?
Yes, I totally do. The goals are based on the population of the community. I would need to work with somebody who, to talk with somebody who is really familiar with the community, especially the degree to which the community is, gardening like this or interested in these issues. Because I am concerned there might be areas that are, I'll just say that, in Evanston, it has been a real effort to push into low income and underserved communities. And I've had to do a concerted, effort on that to be really focused on those communities. So I don't know and people, with leisure tend to be focused on this issue, but other people may not be. So I don't know if I'm being too blunt about this, but so I don't know how Michigan City as a community, views these issues and if it would be a really heavy lift or not. But I'm it certainly is very doable. And I think that there's a lot of concern from lake levels that there be deep-rooted native plants. That's more of a concern than it has been. So I would hope that it would be a very doable thing. And I could be more specific if we, we're really strategizing the issue. I'd be happy to engage in that.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Kathy, you have your hand raised, please.
Thank you, Nancy. I just wanted to say kind of to that last point, there can be some backlash, and I've had some friends in the region who withstood some backlash for having yards like this in their area. So I would just like to invite people to join the Climate Action Challenge that I posted in chat, and I would be happy to provide, some resources and maybe best practices to follow some steps that I took, to do a rendering up front to show your neighbors what it is you plan to do some education of why you want to do it, almost like a design charrette to take some input before you convert your lawn. And then to convert your lawn and to get resources to actually, plant natives, I am the founder and organizer of something called a time bank. So there's some people on this call that gave me plants, not quite for free, but for time bank credit. So this is a way that we can help each other, neighbors, neighbors to neighbors and, you know, try to get this thing done in our yards more affordably, sustainably, and within the sharing economy. So anyway, that's probably enough for me, but I'm just all about this, and I would like to see us do this as an international climate action challenge within the next 90 days coming up in September through November. And again, I put that link in chat so you can find out more about me there.
So I'm really going to show how nerdy I am by addressing another question to Doug. But Doug, what is the difference between a red list and endangered list? If you could explain that, please, because I think everybody has interpreted the red list as being the endangered list. And I was picking up a distinction when you were talking about that.
The IUCN and the US government both use the term endangered species, but they mean slightly different things. They both represent a recognition of a certain threat of extinction to either a species or a subspecies. And the US government is, Fish and Wildlife is the entity that functions under the Endangered Species Act. And that's how they use it. IUCN has data-driven ways of declaring something to be endangered, but it doesn't carry legal force in this country the way the Endangered Species Act does.
Okay.
If I may really quickly answer a question that I was asked earlier about more recent data. I brought a graph up. May I share my screen for just a moment and show the more recent Monarch data from Illinois?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is through 2020. And so you can really see this big dip here in 2013, 2014, and 1996. But this also shows why this cut of the data just between here is a very, very misleading cut of the data.
Doug, thank you so much for bringing that up and pointing that out. You can prove just about anything you want to if you're just selecting certain sections. And I think that's the valuable lesson that you've taught us this evening. So thank you. Any more questions? Okay,
yeah,
we're
there
getting
are-
close to our cutoff time. So I think I'm going to have to call a close here right
Okay.
now because we want to make some announcements.
Sure.
What's happening? Our next Northwest Indiana Green Drinks will be happening on Thursday, and it's September 1st, so it's going to come up really fast. As soon as August ends, then boom, we're going to have our program. Again, 6:30 p.m. We don't have the topic selected because we have two different things that we're vying to get scheduled, so it all depends on how it works out. One will happen in September and the other will more than likely happen in October. Please come back and join us again. I think besides the learning that we have here, it's also an opportunity to get to know and become engaged with some of the members of our Green Drinks community here also. I have an announcement from Save the Dunes. And Dylan, if I'm taking your thunder, then please forgive me.
No way.
We have our, this is so appropriate, it's our Monarch Music and More Fest, which is happening on September 18th. That's a Sunday at 4:30 p.m. It's held at the Brewery Lodge in Michigan City. It's a wonderful event. Besides the music, it includes food, brews, and there'll be adventure packages available also. Tickets are available online, and Eve is telling me to encourage everybody to get your tickets early because you don't want to be that disappointed person the day before you want to be there and there aren't any tickets available, so get those early. It's a beautiful setting. It's almost like a rural part of Michigan City. It's lovely. They put up a tent for us. They have a building where we go in and get our brews and the food. And I went last year and I was just really impressed. So I want to personally invite everybody to take a look at the event and, support our Monarchs in some way. So who else has announcements to make? If you'd raise your hand, that would be great. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then we just have a couple minutes left. This marks the hour-and-a-half mark. I just want to thank everybody for being patient with Dylan and me. This is the first time we've done this together, but I think everything went really smoothly, considering Katie's not with us this evening. And I look forward to doing this again with Dylan and hopefully many times again. And is Hershey still here? Is she still here?
Hi, yes, I am still here.
Okay, would you show us your face, please? Because I
Sure.
want to introduce you as another new staff person with Save the Dunes. Okay, so do you want to introduce yourself real quickly, please?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So I am the new advocacy coordinator for Save the Dunes. So I'm really going to be focused on water pollution prevention. That's going to be kind of my specialty. But if there's anything that you think that you would like to reach out to me about, I'll put my email in the chat for everyone. So if there's anything that you wanted to ask any member of Save the Dunes, I'm more than happy to reach out and we can set something up. So thank you so much, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Dylan, I wanted to give you a chance to make closing comments if you would like.
Sure. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Nancy, for allowing me to support you in this way. Shout out to Christine and joining from Upper Michigan. And to anyone who had a question that didn't get answered, or you wanted to ask a question but you didn't get a chance to, please feel free to drop it in our Facebook comments or on our YouTube. Once that's posted, you can drop that in the comments and we'll be sure to double back and answer the questions to the best of our ability. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dylan. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Linda Katz from St. Louis, Missouri. So we had somebody from down south there, so to speak. Heartfelt thanks to Doug, to Sean, to Leslie, and to Susan for bringing us such a wonderful program this evening. And it's been so inspiring that I hope a lot of us will take a really serious look at our yards, the yards at our churches and businesses and institutions, to see if we can begin just setting aside little portions of that at a time and creating habitats for our butterflies, monarchs included. But as soon as Susan was speaking, they support so much more, including many insects. And I'm also going to throw the birds in here too, because our flowers help them also. So thank you. It's a wrap. And I hope a lot of you will come back and join us next month on September 1st. Thank you and good night.